In this video, I'm going to show you how to use SPSS to analyze data from a market research study. I'm going to use the example of the National Insurance Company dataset for this video. So when you first open the dataset in SPSS, you'll see a window like this. This is what's called the data view. If you look at the bottom left corner, that's the tab name. And that's different from something else called the variable view. So let's first look at the data view and see what's going on here. The data is organized in columns, with each column representing one variable in the dataset, and the variables are based on the questions that are asked. Each question may correspond to one variable or perhaps more variables depending on the type of question. So P1 is the name of the first variable, P2 the second variable, and so on. The rows represent the observations for one respondent on those variables in the dataset. So respondent 1 gave a 7 on the first question, 7 on the second, and so on. So that's what the data view looks like. Let's now go to the variable view and see what these variables represent. So the variable view is completely different. In this, each variable occupies one row, and so the rows basically list all the variables in the dataset, and there are 42 variables, as you can see. The first column tells you the name of the variable, and you can name the variable anything you like as long as it's one word with no spaces. And the rest of the information tells you different things about the variables. So for example, this column, which is called label, essentially tells you what that variable represents. It usually in SPSS it represents it shows the question that was asked, so you can easily understand what that variable means. So for example, the first variable, which is called P1, came from a question which said when national promises to do something, it does so, and the responses were recorded on a scale. The next column shows the values of the variable, whatever they are. In this case, if you click on the three dots next to the value field, you'll see exactly what it means. So this scale has 1 representing strongly agree and 7 representing strongly disagree. So the values column tells you what the numbers mean, and it's obviously very important because if you want to interpret the results at any point, you have to look at this to figure out what the numbers mean. The next column tells you, which is labeled missing, tells you if there are any values of the variable that represent missing values, and in this case, in this data set, there are none. And the only other thing that might be of interest is the column called measure, which represents, or it tells you the type of variable that particular variable is, whether it's nominal, ordinal, or interval or ratio. SPSS treats interval and ratio scales as, it calls them scale variables. So for example, there are 3 choices. There's scale, ordinal, and nominal. So SPSS has recorded this or has understood that this is a scale variable, meaning it is a metric variable, interval or ratio variable. But I would be very wary of taking SPSS's judgment on these matters, unquestioningly. So for example, it does define these measures, these variables, as scale variables, but it also in this data set, there are certain variables which we know are not scale variables, and that includes gender, marital status, and age, and clearly these are incorrectly defined. So I would take these definitions with a pinch of salt. You should have your own judgment as to what these variables are. All right, that's it for the basic view. Let's go back to the data view and start doing some analysis.